I had always imagined Christmas as a fixed point on the map of the year, like a lighthouse. The storms could come, the tides could change, but no matter what else happened, there would be that steady beam of warmth in December. Family, food, music, and the smell of pine leaking through the walls. But last December, that light went out. It wasn't sudden. Things with my son, Daniel, hadn't been smooth for years. Fractures don't just appear overnight. They start as hairline cracks. You don't even notice them at first. Then one day, you're holding the pieces of something you thought would never break. The phone call was short. He didn't waste time dressing it up. "Dad," he said, voice flat, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. "I don't think it's a good idea for you to come this year. For Christmas." There was no maybe in it, no softness, just the blunt edge of finality. I sat in my kitchen chair with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the steam rising off the mug of coffee I'd forgotten to drink. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. "Oh," I said finally. "All right." I don't know if he expected a fight. Maybe part of him had braced for me to beg or to rage, but I didn't give him either. I smiled, though no one could see it, and told him, "Thanks for letting me know." That was it. Conversation over. The line went dead. I sat there another 5 minutes before I stood, grabbed my coat and got in my car. I didn't know where I was going at first. Just away. Home, eventually, though I had no idea what home even meant without family inside it. The road stretched long and gray, 2 narrow lanes flanked by bare trees. December had stripped them down to skeletons. The sky sagged low and heavy, swollen with clouds that refused to break. The whole drive, I thought about how we'd gotten here, about all the little moments that stacked like bricks, building this wall between us. When Daniel was young, he used to wait for me by the window whenever I came home from work. He'd bounce on his toes, grinning so hard his cheeks looked like they'd split. I'd barely set my briefcase down before he launched himself at me. "Dad!" he'd yell, like I'd been gone for a century instead of 8 hours. That boy is gone now, replaced by a man who speaks to me like a stranger. And maybe that's my fault. No, not maybe, definitely. But which mistakes counted most? The big ones? The obvious scars? Or the thousands of small failures no one notices until they add up? The wipers squeaked across the windshield, clearing away a thin drizzle. My reflection wavered back at me in the glass. A man in his late 50s, gray threading through his hair, lines carved deep around his mouth from years of clenching it shut. I wondered if Daniel saw me the same way I saw my own father at this age, distant, tired, too set in his ways to bend. The more I thought, the more hollow I felt. But I didn't turn the car around. I didn't call back. I just drove home to the house that had grown too quiet after his mother left. And I sat with the silence. 2 days later, when the phone lit up with 18 missed calls, that silence shattered. But I'll get to that. First, you need to understand what led to the rejection. Why Daniel said I wasn't welcome. Because nothing makes sense without the history that came before. And God knows our history is heavy with things unsaid, with mistakes that built up like snow on a roof, waiting for the moment it all slid loose. Christmas used to be Daniel's season. He was one of those kids who started counting down the days as soon as Halloween ended. By the 1st of December, he'd have made a paper chain of red and green links, tearing one off each morning until Christmas Eve. I still remember his excitement. When he was 7, and we brought home a tree so tall it scraped the ceiling, he insisted on putting the star on top himself. I held him on my shoulders while he stretched his little arms as far as they could go, tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in concentration. When the star finally perched in place, crooked but shining, he threw his arms around my head and shouted, "We did it, Dad!" That memory hit me hard as I drove, the tires humming beneath me. It was the contrast that hurt most. The way he'd once reached for me so easily, and the way he now pushed me away. I told myself kids grow up, things change. They don't stay small forever. But growing up doesn't usually mean shutting out the people who raised you, does it? Unless they gave you a reason. Maybe I had. I tried to trace it back. Was it after the divorce, When Daniel had to split holidays between two houses? He always acted like it was fine, but I could see the way. He stiffened when his mother and I argued over who got which day. Kids pick up on more than you think. Or maybe it was the years I buried myself in work, thinking I was doing it for him. Long nights at the office, missed games, half-listened conversations. You tell yourself you're providing. You tell yourself it'll pay off later. But later comes, and your son doesn't look at you with pride. He looks at you like a stranger. I stopped at a gas station halfway home. The air smelled like fried food and gasoline, sharp enough to sting my nose. Inside, a young family clustered around the snack aisle. The father carried a toddler on his hip, while the mother picked out bags of chips, laughing at something the little girl said. I tried not to stare, but it was like looking through a window at a life I used to have. The cashier smiled at me as I paid for coffee and a pack of gum. "Headed somewhere for the holidays?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth stuck in my throat. I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, home." Home. The word felt flimsy. A house isn't home when it's just walls and furniture. Home is people. Home is laughter in the kitchen, the sound of wrapping paper tearing, the warmth of belonging. When I walked back to the car, the family was still outside, strapping the toddler into a car seat. She was squealing, kicking her little legs in protest, until her father kissed her forehead. Then she went still, giggling. I looked away quickly, slid into my car, and pulled onto the road again. The miles blurred. My mind replayed old arguments with Daniel. The sharp words, the slammed doors, the times I tried to apologize but never quite said the right thing, and the times I didn't apologize at all, convinced I was right. There was one fight in particular I couldn't stop thinking about. He was 18, home from his first semester at college. He'd been different already, harder to reach, quicker to criticize. That night we'd sat at the table, just the two of us, eating takeout. He'd said something, I don't even remember what. Now, about me never being around when he was younger. It hit a nerve. I snapped back. Told him he didn't know the first thing, about what it took to keep a roof over our heads. He pushed his chair back, face red. I didn't need the roof, Dad. I needed you. The silence that followed was a wound that never really healed. Now, years later, it echoed in my head louder than ever. Maybe that was the moment I lost him for good. Maybe every holiday since then had been him doing me a courtesy, not sharing joy. And this year, he was done pretending. By the time I reached my driveway, night had fallen. The house loomed in darkness, one light on in the kitchen where I'd left it. I sat in the car for a long while, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the front door. Inside was silence. Silence that would stretch through Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Silence I'd chosen, in a way, by not fighting harder when Daniel told me I wasn't welcome. I thought about calling him back, just to say Merry Christmas anyway. But pride is a heavy thing, and mine kept my hand off the phone. So I went inside, set my coat over the chair, and let the quiet settle around me like another layer of winter. 2 days later, when the phone lit up with 18 missed calls, it was still quiet. Too quiet. That first night home, the silence was unbearable. I tried the television, flipping through channels, but every station was filled with holiday. Cheer, movies with perfect, families in matching pajamas, commercials of children tearing into gifts while parents smiled from the couch. I turned it off after 5 minutes. The quiet was better than the lie. I wandered the house like a ghost. Every corner carried a memory. The wall by the stairs where Daniel had measured his height with pencil lines. The kitchen table where he once spilled an entire jug of orange juice, then cried until I told him it was okay. The mantel where we used to hang stockings, his always overflowing with candy canes he'd eat until his stomach hurt. I paused at the box in the hall closet, the decorations, the tangle of lights, the faded ornaments, the old stockings. I almost pulled it out. Almost strung up the lights, set the tree in the corner, made the house look festive even if no one else would see it. But I didn't. What was the point? Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and let my mind slip backward to one of the last Christmas mornings that still felt pure. Daniel must have been 10. I remember the way his footsteps thundered down the hall before the sun was even up. "Dad, Dad, it's Christmas!" He shook my arm until I grunted awake, still half asleep but smiling in spite of myself. We tore into the living room together. The tree glowed, gifts stacked high beneath it. His eyes went wide at the sight, a look of wonder that made all the late nights and long hours worth it in that single second. "Which one first?" I asked. He grabbed the biggest box with his name on it, tore off the paper, and shouted with glee when the video game console appeared. He threw his arms around me, squeezing tight. "You're the best, Dad." I didn't know then that it was one of the last times he'd say that. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving me staring at the bare table in front of me. That boy was gone, and maybe I'd let him slip away without noticing until it was too late. The next day, I tried to keep busy. Chores, small things, fixing a loose hinge, cleaning out a drawer. It was all just noise to fill the hours. In the evening, I got back in the car and drove again, aimlessly this time. The roads stretched into farmland, then woods, then hills. Snow started to fall, light at first, then heavier, until the world outside the windshield blurred into white streaks. The storm slowed traffic. Cars crawled along the highway, taillights glowing red in the dark. I gripped the wheel tight, my knuckles pale. The wipers struggled to keep up, squealing across the glass. Something about the storm pressed against me, as though the sky itself wanted me to stop and pay attention. At one point, I pulled off at a diner glowing warm against the snow. Inside, it smelled of coffee and bacon grease. The place was nearly empty except for an older man at the counter, and two teenagers in a booth, sharing a plate of fries. I slid into a booth by the window. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, poured me coffee without asking. "Traveling for the holidays?" she asked, just like the cashier at the gas station. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Just driving." She gave me a look that was half pity, half understanding. Sometimes that's all we can do. Her words stayed with me long after I left. On the way home, my thoughts shifted to my own father. He'd been a hard man, stern and silent. Holidays with him were stiff affairs. He sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes sharp as though waiting for someone to slip up. I don't remember ever hearing him laugh on Christmas morning. I'd promised myself I'd be different, that I'd be the dad who played on the floor with his kid, who shouted with joy when the wrapping paper flew, who made Christmas magical instead of something to endure. For a while, I think I managed it. But somewhere along the way, work took over. Resentment took root. I caught myself sounding like him more times than I care to admit. Clipped tone, impatient sigh, the weight of expectations that had no business being on a boy's shoulders. And now here I was, on the outside looking in, just as distant as he'd been. Maybe the cycle was harder to break than I'd thought. By the time I pulled into my driveway again, the snow had stopped. The house sat under a pale layer of white, pristine, untouched. It looked almost beautiful in the moonlight. Almost. Inside, the phone sat silent on the counter. I half expected it to ring, some part of me still clinging to hope that Daniel would change his mind, that he'd call and say, "Come after all. Dad, we want you here." But it didn't. So I poured another drink, sat in the quiet, waited for nothing. And 2 days later, when I woke to find 18 missed calls flashing across the screen, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. The road has a way of talking to you when you're alone long enough. The hum of the tires, the rhythm of the wipers, the way the engine fills the silence you don't want to face. It becomes a kind of voice, steady, patient, waiting for you to answer. I didn't. Not at first. I just drove, staring at the thin yellow lines, letting the road stretch on like it would never end. The farther I went, the emptier the world became. Towns thinned into fields, fields into dark woods, houses huddled against the cold, windows glowing soft orange as families gathered inside. I caught glimpses of trees strung with lights, children's silhouettes moving past curtains, snapshots of lives that weren't mine. The silence pressed down heavy. I tried the radio, But every station played Christmas songs, Joy to the World, Silent Night, all those voices singing about peace and love. And I couldn't stomach a word of it. I switched it off and let the quiet come roaring back. Silence can be louder than any song. It has a way of making old memories climb out of their hiding places. One came back sharp as broken glass. Daniel at 15, slamming his bedroom door after another argument. I don't even remember what it was about. Grades, chores, some trivial thing that got twisted into proof of all my failings. I remember standing outside that door, my hand hovering near the knob, debating whether to knock, to go in, sit on the bed, tell him I was sorry. But I didn't. I walked away. Told myself he'd get over it. But maybe kids don't get over things. Maybe they just add them to the pile. A horn blared behind me. I jerked the wheel, realizing I'd drifted too close to the center line. The car swerved back, tires hissing against the wet pavement. My pulse hammered in my neck. "Get it together," I muttered to myself. My voice sounded strange, rusty, like it wasn't used to speaking aloud anymore. I pulled into a rest stop a few miles later just to breathe. The lot was mostly empty, only a handful of cars. A big rig sat idling on the far end, its headlights casting long beams into the night. I sat there with the engine off, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The lines in my face seemed deeper than they should have been. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. I thought about calling Daniel again, thought about leaving a message. "I know you don't want me there, but Merry Christmas anyway," just to remind him I was still here. But my pride stopped me, the same pride that kept me from knocking on his door years ago. The same pride that said, if he doesn't want you, don't force yourself where you're not wanted. So I sat there, drank stale coffee from the gas station, watched snowflakes drift in the glow of the streetlights, and when I finally pulled back onto the highway, the silence climbed into the passenger seat with me. The farther I drove, the quieter it got inside the car. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the road, steady as a heartbeat. Funny thing about silence, it's not really empty. It has a way of filling itself with echoes. Old words you wish you hadn't said. Old moments you wish you hadn't ruined. The first echo that rose up was Christmas Eve when Daniel was 13. He had been moody that whole week, sulking around the house, barely speaking. I thought it was just teenage attitude, so I brushed it off. But that night, while we were stringing lights on the porch, he muttered under his breath, "Why do we even bother?" I snapped. Told him if he didn't care, he could go inside and sulk alone. My voice was sharp enough to cut. He stared at me with something close to hatred in his eyes, then slammed the door behind him. I finished the lights by myself. Later that night, I found him asleep on the couch, TV still on. I covered him with a blanket, but didn't say a word in the morning. Neither did he. That was the year the distance really started to show. The memory stung worse now, on this empty road, than it did back then. The highway stretched ahead, 2 dark lanes cutting through fields glazed with frost. Every so often, I'd pass a house lit up with decorations, inflatable Santas sagging in the yards, strings of colored bulbs draped across porches. One house in particular caught me. A family was out front, bundled in coats and scarves, tossing snowballs back and forth. Their laughter floated through the air even with my windows rolled up. For a second I wanted to pull over, just to watch, just to pretend I was part of it. Instead, I kept driving. The storm picked up again, light flakes thickening into steady snow. The wipers thudded back and forth, smearing streaks across the windshield. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the white. Beyond that tunnel was nothing. That's how it felt inside me too. A narrow path forward, with everything else swallowed by blankness. I pulled into another rest stop when the snow got too heavy. This one had a diner attached. Maggie's Place, written in flickering neon above the door. I went inside, shaking the cold from my coat. The place smelled like grease and coffee, warm and familiar. A few truckers sat at the counter, hunched over plates of eggs. A young couple occupied a booth near the window, leaning close, sharing pie. I slid into a booth by myself. The waitress, gray hair pulled back in a bun, handed me a menu without looking too closely. "What can I get you, hon?" "Just coffee." She nodded and shuffled away. From my booth, I could hear the couple laughing, whispering. The man reached across the table and brushed something off the woman's cheek. She giggled, leaning into his hand. I turned my eyes to the window, watching the snow pile against the glass. The coffee came, steaming and bitter. I sipped it slowly, pretending it warmed more than just my hands. Behind me, one of the truckers said, "Headin' home tomorrow. My kids'll be waitin'." Another chuckled. "You're lucky. Mine are grown. They got their own lives now. Don't have much time for the old man anymore." "Still," the first said, "Christmas is Christmas. You make time." I gripped my mug tighter. That word again, Christmas. It seemed to follow me everywhere, mocking me with what I'd lost. Driving again, I thought about Daniel's first Christmas away at college. He'd come back different, taller, sharper, with opinions about everything. He seemed embarrassed by the traditions we used to share, decorating the tree, baking cookies, watching old movies. That year, he stayed on his phone most of the time, texting friends, laughing at things I wasn't part of. I remember asking him to hang an ornament, the one he'd made in kindergarten with his picture, glued in the center of a popsicle stick frame. He rolled his eyes, muttered, "That's kid stuff," and went back to his phone. It shouldn't have hurt. Kids outgrow things, but it did, because it felt like he was outgrowing me too, and maybe he was. The snow slowed after midnight, leaving the road slick and gleaming under the moon. My headlights picked out patches of ice, forcing me to drive slower, steadier. The silence in the car thickened until it felt alive. I imagined Daniel sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window, headphones on, shutting me out. "Talk to me," I whispered to the empty seat. But of course, no one answered. When I finally reached my town, the streets were quiet. Houses glowed with soft lights, wreaths on the doors, inflatable reindeer sagging in the snow. I turned into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there listening to it tick as it cooled. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought about staying in the car all night, just so I didn't have to face the emptiness inside. Eventually, I forced myself out. The snow crunched under my boots, my breath fogged in the cold air. Inside, the house was dark, still. I dropped my keys on the counter, hung up my coat, and stood in the silence. The silence followed me to bed. It followed me into sleep. It never left. And when I woke 2 mornings later to see 18 missed calls glowing on my phone, the silence broke open into something worse. Didn't sleep much the night after I got home. The silence had a way of pulling me backward. Lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I found myself wandering through old Christmases. Not the good ones, though those were there too, flickering faintly, but the messy ones. The ones that hinted at where it all started to crack. The first Christmas after the divorce was the worst. Daniel was 11. He sat at the kitchen table, his arms crossed, refusing to look at me. The air in the house felt wrong, hollow, like a stage missing half its actors. His mother's absence hung heavy over everything. I had tried. I'd bought the biggest tree I could drag home, strung it with lights, cooked a full dinner, just the 2 of us. But when we sat down at the table, Daniel just stared at his plate. "Not hungry?" I asked. He shrugged. "Mom's making ham tonight, with Mark." Mark, the name burned. Her new boyfriend, already woven into the holiday, as if he belonged there more than I did. I tried to keep my face calm. Tried to say something light. "Well, more mashed potatoes for us, huh?" But he didn't laugh. Didn't even look at me. And I knew, in that moment, Christmas would never be the same. Of course, there were good years before that. I let myself drift further back, into a haze of warm mornings and laughter. Daniel at 6, wearing footy pajamas covered in snowflakes, racing down the stairs. His mother following close behind, her hair a mess, smiling even though it was barely dawn. We sat on the floor together, the 3 of us, tearing open gifts. The paper flying everywhere. She passed me coffee in a mug with little reindeer on it. Daniel held up a toy robot, eyes wide with joy. That was before resentment crept in, before the long nights at the office, before I started snapping at small things. Before I forgot, that presence mattered more than presents. Funny how the best memories hurt the most, because you can't go back. You can only measure the distance between then and now. The years after the divorce blurred together. Every December became a negotiation. Which nights he'd spend with me, which with her. I tried to make my nights matter. I took him ice skating once, bundled in scarves and gloves. He smiled that night, I remember. But even then, it felt like a borrowed smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Another year, I bought him a new guitar. He played it once, half-hearted, then left it in the corner. Music wasn't his passion after all. I kept trying, but every attempt felt like throwing gifts into a well. They disappeared, leaving nothing behind. It wasn't just the divorce. I know that now. It was me. I thought of my own father again, the man who made Christmas feel like duty instead of joy. He never lifted a finger to decorate, never wrapped a gift. He just sat, stone-faced, while my mother fussed over the details. I had sworn I'd be different, and in some ways I was. But in the end, I repeated the pattern. Not with silence, but with absence. Always gone, always working, always telling myself it was for the family, when really it was for my pride. And then when Daniel pulled away, I didn't chase him. I told myself he needed space. I told myself he'd come back when he was ready. But what if space was just another word for neglect? Christmases grew quieter. By the time he was in his 20s, he'd show up for dinner but spend most of it checking his phone, answering texts, half listening when I tried to talk. One year, I asked if he wanted to help decorate the tree. He said, "That's your thing, Dad, not mine." I decorated it anyway, alone. The lights glowed, but the house still felt dark. Now, lying in my bed in the dark, I thought about all those ghosts. The good mornings, the bitter evenings, the meals that tasted of absence more than food. I realized something then. Daniel hadn't told me not to come out of cruelty. He told me because, to him, I wasn't part of Christmas anymore. I had been fading from it for years, until finally, he just said the thing out loud. And as much as it hurt, maybe he wasn't wrong. Still, 18 missed calls. Whatever had changed in those 2 days, something had cracked open. Something urgent enough to drag him back toward me, at least for a moment. I didn't know yet what it was. But lying there, haunted by ghosts, I felt the weight of every mistake pressing down on me, heavier than the blankets, heavier than the dark. The night was long. I drifted in and out of sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, the ghosts pulled me back. Not the kind that rattle chains in the dark, but the kind that whisper in your own voice, reminding you of what you had and what you squandered. The first ghost that came was the best Christmas we ever had. Daniel must have been 8. We'd woken before sunrise. The 3 of us, me, his mother, and him, padding into the living room in our pajamas. The tree sparkled, ornaments glinting in the glow of the lights. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon from the rolls baking in the oven. Daniel stopped in the doorway, gasping. "Santa came!" he shouted, even though he already knew by then. He ran to the stockings, tugging his down, spilling candy canes and toy cars across the floor. His mother laughed, ruffling his hair. I pulled out the camcorder and filmed the whole scene, her kneeling beside him while he tore wrapping paper with wild joy. At one point, he held up a toy fire truck and turned to me. "Thanks, Dad." His grin was so pure, so full, that it made my chest ache in the best way. We ate cinnamon rolls together. Sticky fingers. Laughter echoing through the house. For a little while, everything was whole. That morning felt eternal, like nothing could break it. But nothing lasts forever. The second ghost that came was the Christmas after the divorce. I'd tried to hold it together. For him. I bought a tree, cooked a full dinner, turkey, potatoes, stuffing, pie. I thought maybe if I made it big enough, it would distract him from what was missing. But when we sat down at the table, he barely touched his food. "Not hungry?" I asked, forcing a smile. He shrugged, poking his fork into the potatoes. "Mom's making ham tonight, with Mark." The way he said the name, flat, ordinary, hurt more than if he'd spat it out. Like Mark was normal. Like Mark belonged there with her, while I was the one on the outside. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice light. "Well, more pie for us, huh?" He didn't laugh. He didn't even look up. We ate in silence, forks scraping plates. The clock ticking on the wall. The sound of absence so loud I could barely breathe. Later, when I tried to suggest we watch a Christmas movie, he shook his head. "I'm tired." He went to bed early. I sat in the living room alone, staring at the tree, its lights blinking in patterns that didn't comfort me. That was the night I realized holidays wouldn't heal what had broken. They'd just remind us of it. The third ghost came from further back. My own father. I must have been 10. Christmas morning in our house was stiff and silent. My mother tried to make it bright. She baked cookies, decorated the tree, put a record on the player. But my father sat in his chair, stone-faced, opening his gifts like they were obligations.